Her father left her nothing but a broken-down garage, on paper at least. Carrie Ames, overlooked daughter and lifelong afterthought, didn't protest. Her half-brother called it junk. His wife laughed. But buried under rust and unpaid taxes was a second lot, prime zoning, and 6 figures waiting to be claimed. She didn't argue. She notarized. And by the time they realized what the scrap was worth, the sale was final. And their names were nowhere on the deed. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. The fluorescent lights in Jared Fox's law office buzzed faintly, like a dying fly trapped between glass. The table was polished walnut, long enough to separate enemies. Carrie Ames sat at one end, hands folded neatly over a cheap purse, while her half-brother Shane sprawled at the other, boot tapping like a clock counting down his patience. Misty, his wife, scrolled on her phone with the self-satisfaction of someone who already assumed victory. Jared adjusted his reading glasses and cleared his throat, the sound crisp as paper tearing. Per the last will and testament of Thomas Ames, deceased March the 2nd, property and all contained assets located at 418 Jefferson Street, described as the garage property and contents, are hereby bequeathed to Carolyn Ames. The words hung in the air, heavy as exhaust fumes. Carrie blinked once, twice. That was all? The garage? After 20 years of silence, no letter, no explanation, just a grease-stained box full of ghosts. Shane barked a laugh. You're kidding. That's it? He gives her the junkyard? Jared didn't flinch. It's not a junkyard. It's listed as an active parcel in the property register. Active? Misty scoffed, flicking her acrylic nails. That thing's got raccoons for tenants. Good luck selling that, sweetheart. Carrie didn't look at her. She just smiled faintly, that quiet, dangerous smile people wear when they've just realized something no one else has. Guess I'll find out. The lawyer pushed a manila folder across the table. Inside was the title, stamped, dated, and sealed. Owner of record, Carolyn Ames. No liens, no holds. Shane's boot stopped tapping. His jaw twitched once. He meant for me to have that, he said flatly. He didn't word it right. You know how old men are. Confused. Jared's tone turned to granite. Mr. Ames's will was executed properly. Witnesses verified. His intent is clear. Bull! Misty snapped. Thomas said Shane would inherit everything from the shop. We were there when he talked about it. Carrie's eyes flicked to her half-brother. Funny how he didn't say it to me, or write it down. He looked at her then, really looked, searching for weakness, for guilt, for any sign she might hand it over, just to keep peace. She gave him nothing. The clock on the wall ticked through the silence. Outside, a cold drizzle blurred the city windows, washing the gray of Buffalo's streets into watercolor streaks. Jared continued, voice steady. There are also personal effects stored at the property. You'll need to conduct an inventory before appraisal. Miss Ames, I'll email the transfer forms and deed confirmation. Appraisal? Shane repeated, his voice tightening. Standard procedure, Jared replied, to establish estate closure. Misty leaned forward, perfume too sweet for the stale office air. So what's she gonna do? Auction off moldy tires? There's nothing in that garage worth more than scrap. Carrie rose from her chair, collecting the folder and sliding it neatly into her purse. Scrap has value, she said. Her tone was calm, but beneath it ran a pulse of something else, something raw and unspoken. The old man had never given her much. Not approval, not affection, not a single, I'm proud of you. But he'd left her something now, and she couldn't yet tell if it was a curse or a challenge. As she reached the door, Shane's voice followed. You're not going to keep it. You don't know what's in there. Carrie paused, hand on the doorknob without turning. Neither do you. Outside, the rain had turned to sleet, peppering her coat as she stepped into the parking lot. The law office lights glowed weakly behind her, distorted through the wet glass. She didn't head home right away, just stood there for a moment, feeling the weight of the keys Jared had pressed into her palm. The metal was cold, rough-edged, like it still remembered grease and grit. Her breath fogged in the air. For the first time in years, she felt that sharp, dangerous thrill she used to get when fixing something broken, before life had convinced her to stop trying. She turned the key in her fingers, a small metallic click echoing in the quiet lot. Whatever waited behind that rusted garage door, it was hers now. Entirely hers. And if Shane wanted to come for it, he'd learn just how much of their father she'd inherited. The sleet turned to snow as she started the car, headlights slicing through the mist toward Jefferson Street. The padlock on the garage door looked older than she was. Its surface was furred with rust, orange against dull gray metal, the numbers barely visible through the corrosion. Carrie slid the key in anyway. It resisted, then gave with a dry, hollow clack. The hinges screamed when she pulled the door up. Cold air and the reek of stale oil rolled out in a wave that hit her full in the face. Mildew, mice, old gasoline. A smell so thick it tasted metallic on her tongue. For a moment she just stood there, hand over her mouth, eyes adjusting to the gloom. The place was worse than she'd imagined, and somehow exactly what she'd expected. Stacks of busted car parts lined the walls in crooked towers. Rotting cardboard boxes overflowed with spark plugs and cracked belts. A sagging shelf bowed under jars of bolts, each one labeled in her father's sharp, angry handwriting. A busted drill press slumped in one corner, half swallowed by a tarp stiff with grease. Carrie stepped inside. The concrete floor felt soft under her boots, littered with paper scraps and disintegrating rags. The air was so still she could hear the faint drip of water somewhere behind the wall. She brushed her gloved hand along a fender, leaving a clean stripe through the grime. Beneath the dust, the paint still held a faint gleam of deep red. "Of course," she murmured, "you'd keep everything but me." She didn't say his name. The building was loud enough with ghosts already. Toward the back, half hidden under a sheet of plastic, sat something bigger. A skeletal frame on 4 flat tires. She peeled the plastic away, coughing as dust bloomed into the light. A Mustang. 1968, maybe. Or what was left of one. The roof was dented in, the doors missing, and a family of spiders had claimed the engine bay, but the lines were still there, curved, muscular, defiant. She circled it slowly, the way you circle a memory you're not ready to touch. Her father must have dragged it in decades ago and never finished it. Typical. The man started projects like he started arguments. Loud, messy, and never once saw them through. Carrie took out her phone. The camera clicked softly as she documented everything. The parts, the shelves, the receipts curled into brittle scrolls. Every photo felt like evidence in a case she hadn't yet decided to prosecute. The wind outside picked up, rattling the door on its tracks. She shivered, wishing she'd brought gloves thick enough for more than nostalgia. Her phone buzzed. Deb Monroe. "You alive in there?" Carrie smiled faintly and typed back. "Barely. Smells like something died in 1987. The reply came fast. "Send pics. Maybe someone who flips cars will want the mess." She hesitated, thumb hovering over the screen. Then she started attaching photos. Wide shots first, then details of the car, the tools, even the cracked windows. Each image went out like a signal flare. When the last one sent, she tucked the phone into her jacket and leaned against the workbench. The bench was cluttered with relics. Half-empty oil cans, yellowed receipts from a parts supplier long defunct, a single wrench polished smooth from use. She picked it up, turned it over. The initials TA were scratched into the handle. Her father had left his mark on everything, even the junk. She set the wrench down and forced a breath past the tightness in her chest. "You wanted to bury me under your mess," she whispered, "but I'll dig myself out." A shadow moved across the frosted garage window. Carrie froze. The shape lingered. Broad shoulders, unmistakably male, then vanished. She waited, listening. Only the wind. Only the slow tick of something cooling in the dark. Probably nothing. Probably. She lowered the door until it latched and turned the key in the lock again, double-checking it before she walked to her car. The sleet had stopped, leaving everything slick and shining in the weak afternoon sun. Her phone buzzed once more. "Deb. Got a guy who's interested already. Says that corner's worth a look." Carrie glanced back at the garage, its rusted panels glinting faintly like armor left too long in the rain. Her breath caught. If the junk had value, then maybe the rest of her father's legacy did too. And if Shane found out before she figured out what that value was, she'd lose everything again. She got into her car, heart pounding harder than she cared to admit, and watched the shadow of the garage shrink in her rearview mirror. Carrie had been in government offices before. Gray walls, humming lights, the faint smell of toner and burnt coffee. But this one felt different. Maybe because, for the first time in a long while, she wasn't here to ask for help. She was here to confirm something that already belonged to her. The Erie County Assessor's office buzzed with quiet efficiency. A printer chattered somewhere behind the counter, spitting out deeds and zoning maps like ticker tape. Carrie clutched her file folder to her chest and stepped forward when the clerk at window 3 waved her up. A nameplate read, "Ellie Tran," thin, focused, wearing oversized glasses and a calm expression that didn't quite match the chaos behind her. "Can I help you?" Ellie asked, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. Carrie slid the paperwork through the slot. "Property title confirmation, parcel 418 Jefferson." Ellie scanned the pages quickly. "Executor? Jared Fox?" "That's my attorney." The clerk nodded, tapping at her keyboard. Her nails clicked in neat rhythm, like a mechanic testing a new engine. After a moment, her brow lifted. "Huh. This parcel's zoned commercial. That's interesting." Carrie frowned. "Commercial?" "Yep. C2 highway frontage. That corner's heating up fast." Ellie turned the screen slightly, revealing a color-coded map, bright yellow for residential, green for parks, and red where developers had started circling like sharks. Carrie's little rectangle of property sat right in the middle of a widening red strip. She felt her pulse jump. "I thought it was just an old garage." Ellie smiled, a little conspiratorially. "Around here, old garages turn into breweries or parking lots overnight. Developers love highway access. You might be sitting on something worth a whole lot more than you think." Carrie swallowed. "How much more?" The printer came to life, grinding out a few pages. Ellie pulled the sheet and passed it across. "This is the most recent sales data for adjacent parcels. And this," she added, handing over another page, "is a zoning heat map from the planning department. You'll want your lawyer to confirm, but if this is clean title, and it looks like it is, you're in a good position." Carrie glanced down at the numbers. The cheapest nearby sale was $95,000. The most expensive topped $210,000. She leaned back, blinking. "For that corner?" "Believe it or not." Ellie shrugged. "Buffalo's weird that way. 10 years of nothing, then suddenly everyone wants a piece." Carrie's phone buzzed again. "Deb, you find anything yet?" She typed back one word. "Maybe." Ellie printed a few more documents, stapled them, and slid the packet over. "Keep those safe, and don't let anyone talk you into selling until you know exactly what you've got. The zoning board's been sloppy lately. Some parcels changed hands without full disclosures." Carrie tucked the papers into her folder, fingers trembling just enough for her to notice. Thanks. Seriously. Ellie grinned. I like seeing the underdog win one once in a while. Outside, the wind had picked up again, scattering slush across the sidewalk. Carrie stood under the building's awning, flipping through the papers as cold drops stung her face. The numbers didn't lie. This was real. Her father's junk might actually be worth something. Something big. She pulled out her phone and called Deb. Her friend answered on the second ring. You sound weird. What happened? Deb. The land. It's zoned commercial. Near the highway. Ellie, this clerk, showed me the map. It's prime development. There was a pause. Then Deb's voice went up an octave. You're kidding. That dump? I thought it was wedged between a scrapyard and a body shop. Yeah, Carrie said, staring out at the melting snow. Exactly where every developer wants a parking lot. Deb let out a low whistle. Send me the numbers. I'm gonna faint over lunch. Carrie laughed for the first time in days, a short, startled sound that fogged into the air. I'm heading to Jared's to update the deed records. If Shane tries anything, I want the paperwork airtight. Good plan. And Carrie? Yeah? Don't tell him a damn thing yet. Carrie smiled, the same dangerous half-smile she'd worn in Jared's office. I wasn't planning to. By the time she reached Jared's office, the sun was breaking through the clouds, weak but determined. Jared met her in the hallway, and she handed over the updated zoning documents like they were proof of survival. Looks like your father left you more than a headache, Jared said, flipping through the pages. We'll get this recorded today. He stepped away to fax the revisions. Carrie stood by the window, watching traffic pulse along the wet street. Her phone buzzed again. A new text. Shane. You should share what's inside before you do something stupid. She stared at the screen, her reflection ghosting over the message. The sleet outside turned the world silver. Carrie typed a reply, then deleted it. Some things were better left unsaid. For now. She slipped the phone into her coat pocket and looked out toward the highway again, where snowmelt gleamed like wet metal. Whatever this garage turned out to be, it was no longer her father's secret. Carrie had always hated phones that didn't stop ringing, at work, at home, even in dreams, but this time the sound carried something new. Leverage. It started 3 days after the zoning discovery. Jared had sent quiet feelers through his legal network, calling it an informal valuation process. In plain English, it meant he'd told the right people to sniff around without tipping off the vultures, namely Shane and Misty. Now Carrie's cell buzzed every few hours with numbers from area codes she didn't recognize. The first message came from a man named Tony Rizzo, voice rough and friendly, like a guy who lived on coffee and shop dust. Heard you've got a garage full of classics gone to seed. I flip restorables for auction. I'll take the whole contents for 30 grand cash. No questions, no piecemeal. 30,000. Carrie stared at her phone, sitting at her tiny kitchen table with the folder of documents spread out like a miniature war map. Her breath hitched. That was more than her father's estate had been worth on paper. She called Deb. Her friend answered over the hum of a warehouse fan. You sound like someone just proposed. Close. Some guy wants to buy everything in the garage for 30,000. Deb whistled. You're kidding. That junk? That junk, Carrie repeated softly, staring at the photographs on her laptop screen, the rows of rusted parts, the half-finished Mustang skeleton. Suddenly, they didn't look like junk at all. They looked like proof. Tell him you'll think about it, Deb said. If he's real, he'll wait. By noon, another voicemail waited. This time from Keller Salvage, a local scrap operation that had been circling old industrial lots for years. The man's voice was quick, transactional. We'll pay $12,500 for exclusive metal reclamation rights, cleanup included. You keep the tools and vehicles, we just want the scrap. Carrie played that one twice, then 3 times, listening to the way the man said exclusive, as if he already assumed ownership. At 4:42 p.m., the third message came. No introduction, just a smooth baritone and a measured pause between each line. Ms. Ames, my name is Robert Alden. I represent a private development group reviewing parcels near Jefferson and Mill. We understand you hold the deed to 418 Jefferson and possibly adjacent frontage. If you're open to conversation, call me back. We're prepared to make an offer on the property itself. Carrie sat very still. Outside her apartment window, snowmelt streaked down the glass, turning the world into smeared light. She didn't call back. Not yet. Instead, she opened Jared's number. He answered before the second ring. "Tell me you're sitting down," she said. "I'll stand. It keeps the blood moving." She read him each voicemail, word for word. By the time she finished, Jared let out a long exhale. "That didn't take long. Should I call them?" "Not directly. I'll vet the buyers. You keep a neutral tone if they reach out again. Polite, non-committal. No commitments without review." Carrie smiled faintly. "Playing it cool. Got it." "Also," Jared added, "I want all title documents, tax records, and the original deed kept somewhere safe. If your half-brother gets any ideas, I'd rather not be chasing replacements." That night, Carrie stopped at a hardware store on the edge of downtown. The clerk barely looked up as she wheeled a small fireproof safe to the counter. "Rough neighborhood?" he joked. "Rough family," she replied. By the time she got home, she'd cleared a space in her bedroom closet and bolted the safe to the floor. Into it went the original title, the zoning reports Ellie had printed, and the signed transfer receipts from Jared's office. She shut the lid and twisted the dial, feeling something close to peace click into place. But it didn't last. At 9:12 p.m., her phone lit up with a new message, Shane's name flashing across the screen again. "Heard some folks sniffing around Jefferson. You planning to share? Or should I stop by?" Carrie's fingers hovered over the keyboard. She wanted to say it's mine, to shove the truth in his face. But she'd learned from her father that power wasn't in what you said. It was in what you didn't. So she deleted the draft and turned off the ringer. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of her old refrigerator. She poured herself a glass of cheap red wine and sat by the window, staring at the blurred glow of the city beyond. For years, she'd been the one left out, underestimated, dismissed. Now she had something everyone else wanted, and for once, she didn't have to apologize for it. The safe sat closed in the corner, matte black and solid as a heartbeat, her father's legacy, rewritten. But outside, headlights slowed near her building, then stopped. A dark pickup idled at the curb for a long, silent minute before rolling away. Carrie set her wine down without drinking it. The sound of boots crunching over gravel reached her before the voice did. Carrie looked up from the garage lock, the key halfway in. Morning light glinted off the melting snow, the air sharp enough to sting her lungs. "Open it up," Shane said. He stood 10 feet away, hands jammed into his jacket pockets, a familiar scowl twisted into something meaner. Misty hovered behind him in a pink parka, lips pursed, eyes scanning the building like she already owned it. Carrie straightened slowly. "You're trespassing." Shane's laugh was short and humorless. "On family property? Don't kid yourself." "It's mine, Shane. I've got the deed." "That paper doesn't mean squat if the will's wrong." He stepped closer, boots sinking into the slush. "Dad told me the garage and everything in it was supposed to go to me. You got lucky because he didn't update his files before he died." Carrie met his glare, steady. "Luck has nothing to do with signatures." Misty crossed her arms. "We'll see what our lawyer says." Carrie didn't move. The key turned in the padlock with a solid click. She swung the door up just enough to block the entrance with her body, standing in the frame. Behind her, the faint smell of oil and rust drifted into the cold air like a memory neither of them wanted. "You have 5 seconds to back up," she said. "Or what?" Misty snapped. Carrie smiled, calm, even amused. "Mine's faster." Misty blinked, confused. Carrie pulled out her phone, thumbed through her contacts, and tapped Jared Fox. The call connected on the first ring. "Jared," she said, eyes still on Shane. "They're here, at the garage." "I thought they might be." Jared's voice came, crisp and composed. "Gimme a minute." Misty scoffed. "You think calling your buddy makes this legal?" Carrie didn't answer. She watched Shane pace in the slush, jaw tight, eyes flicking toward the open door behind her. He wanted to push past her. She could see it. But something in her posture made him hesitate. A moment later, her phone buzzed with a text from Jared. "Fax sent. Show them." She held up the screen. The image loaded slow on the weak signal. A scanned document with a notarized seal. "Affidavit of transfer and probate certification. Sole heir, Carolyn Ames." "Recognize that?" she asked, turning the phone toward them. Shane's jaw twitched. Misty squinted. "Could be fake." Carrie's tone was ice. "Then call your lawyer." They didn't move. Somewhere behind them, a horn honked, Deb's beat-up Subaru easing to the curb. She stepped out, holding a coffee cup in one hand, phone in the other. "Morning, circus crew. I brought caffeine and curiosity." "Stay out of this," Shane snapped. Deb grinned. "Sure thing, champ." She leaned against the hood of her car, crossed one ankle over the other, and sipped. "Popcorn time." Misty turned toward her. "You think this is funny?" "I think it's predictable," Deb said. "You two trying to bully your way into something that's already signed, sealed, and recorded." Shane took another step forward. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Then maybe read the county website?" Deb shot back. Carrie let them squabble for a moment, keeping her eyes on Shane. He was wound tight. She could feel it in the air. A lifetime of resentment pressed behind his glare. For him, this wasn't just property. It was proof their father had chosen her. "Go home, Shane," she said quietly, "before you make this worse." He hesitated, just long enough to make her think he might. Then he turned, slamming his fist against the side of his truck before climbing in. Misty muttered something sharp under her breath as the tires spit slush across Carrie's boots, and the pickup roared away. Deb whistled low. "Family reunions always that warm?" Carrie exhaled, tension bleeding out of her shoulders. "That's the first time I've ever seen him back down." "Better frame it," Deb said, half joking. Carrie almost smiled. But before she could, her phone buzzed again. Unknown number. She frowned and answered. "Carrie Ames." "Hi, Ms. Ames. This is Ellie Tran from the assessor's office. I know it's early, but something came up while I was reviewing last week's filings." Carrie's pulse picked up. "What kind of something?" "Well," Ellie hesitated. "When I pulled the parcel data for 418 Jefferson, I noticed an attached sublot, barely visible in the tax records. It's listed as 418B, technically still under Thomas Ames. Looks like your father owned 2 parcels. The second one's not in the will." Carrie went still. Deb's chatter faded. The morning seemed to narrow into a single heartbeat. "2?" she repeated. "You're sure?" "Positive," Ellie said. "Same address block. It might have been added years ago and never separated in the database. If it's still unclaimed, it could default to you under estate continuity." Carrie looked toward the garage, the rusted walls, the half-lit shadows inside. She'd thought she finally understood what she'd inherited. Turns out, she hadn't even opened the whole box yet. "Send me everything," she said quietly. Ellie hesitated. "You might want to have Jared review it first. If this second lot's real, it changes everything." Carrie's fingers tightened around the phone. The sleet had begun again, thin and steady, whispering against the metal siding. Yeah, she said. It already has. Snowmelt dripped from the county building's stone ledge, falling in slow, rhythmic beats that sounded like a ticking clock. Carrie sat in the hallway outside the assessor's records division, a manila folder balanced on her lap. Jared was beside her, coat still buttoned, his briefcase upright like a sentry between his shoes. He checked his watch. They'll bring the full parcel file any minute. Carrie nodded but said nothing. Her fingers traced the embossed letters on the folder. Estate of Thomas A. Ames. She'd seen the words so many times in the past few weeks, they'd begun to feel like a brand. A clerk emerged from the records room, Ellie Tran, neat as ever, with a stack of printed maps in her arms. She smiled when she spotted Carrie. I thought you'd come back fast. Fast as I could, Carrie said, standing. You said there was another lot? Ellie laid the papers out on a side table and flattened them carefully. Here. She pointed to the larger block shaded in gray, 418 Jefferson. Then, directly behind it, separated by a dotted line, a smaller rectangle marked 418B. It's only about 40 feet deep, Ellie explained. Basically a gravel pad, but it shares the same tax ID. Your father must have bought it years ago when the city was selling off service lots. Technically it's still his, but if Jared files an amendment, it folds under your inheritance automatically. Jared leaned in, his glasses catching the overhead light. I'll need copies of every supporting record, purchase, lien release, and the assessor's cross-reference. Ellie already had them ready. I figured. She handed him a thick sheaf of documents. Carrie studied the map again. The small rectangle behind the garage looked insignificant. Just a patch of forgotten ground. But something about it sent a charge through her. That gravel yard, she murmured. I used to think it belonged to the auto shop next door. Not anymore, Jared said, scanning the paperwork. It's yours, or it will be once I get this notarized. He pulled a pen from his pocket, signing 2 forms in quick strokes. This changes your listing value considerably. How considerably? Carrie asked. He smiled, just barely. Enough to make your half-brother's head explode. Deb appeared not long after, pushing through the glass door with a gust of cold air and a grocery bag slung over her arm. I brought survival food, she said. Also markers. You're gonna need flyers if we're going public. Carrie blinked. Flyers? Yeah, for advertising. You're not handing this over quietly. Anymore. Not with a second lot in play. Deb dumped her haul on the table. Poster board, thumbtacks, a half-eaten muffin. You've got leverage now. Use it. Ellie hid a small grin. She's not wrong. Jared nodded once. I'll file the amendment and circulate the notice. Once that's public record, anyone trying to contest the estate will be boxed out. They spent the next hour cross-checking the paperwork. The sound of the copier filled the office, mingling with the hum of fluorescent lights. Carrie felt strangely calm, almost detached, as if she were watching someone else's luck unfold. By the time they left, the snow had turned to fine rain, glinting under the streetlights like wire. Deb insisted on stopping by a diner near the courthouse. The air inside smelled of coffee and buttered toast, warm and ordinary, a jarring contrast to the high-stakes tension still buzzing in Carrie's chest. She spread the printed maps and photos across the booth while Deb took a pen to a clean sheet of paper. Okay, Deb said, chewing the end of the pen. 2 properties. 1 garage full of junk that might be gold. 1 gravel lot with potential. We make flyers that hint at both without giving too much away. Carrie raised an eyebrow. Like a teaser? Exactly. Deb wrote in block letters. Prime commercial lots. Zoned and ready. Private sale. Ellie texted a few minutes later. Records update confirmed. You're officially owner of both parcels. Carrie's phone buzzed again before she could reply. Unknown number. She froze until Jared's name appeared underneath it. Rizzo called me, Jared said over the noise of the diner. He's heard rumors of a second parcel. He's doubling his offer for the contents. 60,000 cash. Wants first rights if you sell the land. Deb's eyes widened. 60? For the junk? Carrie stirred her coffee slowly. The surface shimmered like oil. Tell him not yet. You sure? Jared asked. That's a solid figure. Not yet, she repeated, softer. I want to know what that second lot's hiding first. Jared paused, as if weighing the tone in her voice. All right, I'll stall him. When she hung up, Deb leaned across the table. You really think there's more to it? Carrie looked down at the map again. The neat boxes, the little dotted line between them. Her father had always kept things hidden. Receipts behind tool cabinets, cash under floorboards, grudges buried deep. Maybe this was just one more secret he'd tried to take with him. Outside the window, headlights passed in quick streaks of yellow. The reflection of the map ghosted across the glass, merging with the blurred image of her own face. Carrie's printer had been running for nearly an hour, its steady hum filling the apartment like white noise. The small desk beside her bed was buried in paperwork. Copies of the deed, the assessor's maps, notarized affidavits. Every page bore her name now, Carolyn Ames, sole heir and owner. If Misty wanted a fight, she was going to have to do it in front of a judge. The text had come that morning, right after breakfast. Misty, you doctored that will. Everyone knows it. No punctuation, no greeting, just accusation, thrown like a brick through a window. Carrie hadn't answered. Instead, she'd gone straight to work, printing duplicates of every document Jared had helped her file. She wanted physical proof, something she could hand to a clerk or an officer if things got ugly. By the time the last sheet slid into the out tray, her apartment smelled faintly of hot toner and steel resolve. She stapled each packet neatly, slipped them into plastic sleeves, and labeled them with bright post-its. Will, deed, tax ID cross-ref, zoning verification. If they were going to call her a liar, she'd make sure she could drown them in truth. When she dropped the envelopes off at the notary service, the clerk barely looked up. You again? Just tying up loose ends, she said. Lot of paperwork for one person. Carrie smiled faintly. Depends on the person. By noon, Ellie's name lit her phone. Hey, I wanted to give you a heads up, Ellie said, voice low. Word's going around the office that someone called in asking questions about your file. A woman. Loud, impatient. Sounded like she was trying to catch us off guard. Misty, Carrie said. That'd be my guess, Ellie replied. Don't worry, everything's sealed. And I just posted the ownership confirmation to the public records portal. It's official now. Your name's the only one on both parcels. Carrie let out a slow breath. Thank you. No problem, Ellie said. Then, with a hint of pride, I like when the right people win. But the calm didn't last. By late afternoon, Deb called from the plumbing warehouse, her voice tight and clipped. Guess who just showed up at my work? Shane? Front door, in broad daylight. Carrie felt her pulse spike. Deb, don't. Oh, don't worry, Deb cut in. I didn't do anything. I just told him exactly where he could shove his intimidation tactics. In the background, Carrie could hear voices. Other employees, the thrum of a forklift, someone muttering, What the hell's going on? Deb's tone sharpened. He came in all puffed up, talking about how you falsified probate, that the will's a fake. Then he tried to corner me by the counter. What did you say? I said, loud enough for everyone in the loading bay to hear. Get the hell out, Shane. She's got the law, and you've got Jack. Then I told my boss he was trespassing. Carrie couldn't help it. She laughed, a real, shaky laugh that surprised her. You didn't. Oh, I did. He turned red as transmission fluid and left before security came out. Deb exhaled hard. You owe me coffee for that one. I owe you more than Coffee. Just make it worth my while when you sell that gold mine of a lot, Deb said, her voice softening. And Carrie, be careful. He's getting desperate. That evening, Carrie met Jared at his office to go over the updated filings. The lobby was quiet, the only sound the low whir of the copy machine. Jared looked up from his desk as she walked in, exhaustion shadowing his eyes. "You've been busy," he said, gesturing to the thick envelope she carried. "I wanted everything notarized." "Smart. That's how you keep liars from rewriting your story." He flipped through her stack of papers, nodding at each tab. "Perfect. You've got every angle covered. They can accuse you of anything they want. It won't hold up for 5 seconds." Carrie leaned back in the chair, finally letting herself breathe. "So I'm safe?" Jared smiled faintly. "Legally untouchable." She nodded, the phrase echoing in her mind like armor settling into place. Legally untouchable. It had a nice ring to it. They wrapped up just before dark. Outside, the air smelled of rain again, heavy and metallic. Carrie zipped her coat and walked toward her car, papers clutched tight under one arm. Her headlights reflected off wet asphalt, the world quiet for the first time in days. Then her phone vibrated in her pocket. A text from an unknown number. "You think documents protect you?" Paper burns. Carrie froze, the cold biting through her gloves. She looked up and caught a flash of movement near the corner. Someone ducking behind the row of parked cars, a shadow melting into the dark. Her hand tightened around the envelope. Carrie hadn't slept much since the shadow behind her car. The message, paper burns, still sat on her phone, unread but etched into her nerves. She'd changed her locks, replaced the batteries in her door camera, and doubled the bolts on her safe. But the fear had done something unexpected. It sharpened her. By the end of the week, Jared called. "You might want to meet this buyer in person," he said. "She's not like the others." That's how Carrie found herself at a coffee shop near the old grain elevators, sunlight flashing off the frozen river outside the window. Across from her sat a woman in a worn leather jacket, sleeves rolled to the elbows, hands scarred with the kind of marks that came from years under a hood. "Name's Marissa Dunn," she said, shaking Carrie's hand with a mechanic's grip. Firm, confident, a touch of grease still beneath her nails. "I run a small restoration outfit over in Cheektowaga. We've outgrown our space, and your garage, well, it's got bones." Carrie smiled cautiously. "Most people just see rust." Marissa leaned back, eyes bright. "Rust's what happens before you find the good metal. I like places with history." Carrie's guard eased, just slightly. "So, what's your offer?" Marissa slid an envelope across the table. Inside, a typed sheet. Concise. Businesslike. Purchase. Property and contents. $165,000. Carrie's breath caught. "That's cash," Marissa said. "One condition, fast closing. I don't do drawn-out escrow. I've got a crew ready to move in by next week." Carrie looked up, stunned. "Why the rush?" Marissa's expression softened. "My dad ran a shop too. Lost it to debt collectors before I was old enough to help. I don't let chances sit long enough for someone else to steal them." The words hit Carrie square in the chest. She nodded once. "I get that." By the time she left the coffee shop, her hands were shaking. Not from fear this time, but from the sheer velocity of it all. A deal like that could change everything. Jared confirmed it the next morning. "Her financing checks out. Local bank verification, funds in escrow. If we fast-track signatures, you'll be closed within 72 hours. He adjusted his tie, glancing over the paperwork. "You'll want to clear out the garage before the weekend." Carrie looked at the piles of receipts and photos scattered across his desk. "Then let's get to work." Saturday dawned gray and raw, wind howling down Jefferson Street. Deb showed up in work boots and a flannel shirt holding 2 thermoses of coffee. "All right, boss," she said. Where do you want the junk? Sorted. Metal in the salvage pile, tools in the keep stack, trash in the bin. For hours they worked side by side, dragging out the remnants of Thomas Ames's life. A cracked air compressor, boxes of old carburetors, even a busted jukebox that still smelled faintly of cigarette smoke and beer. Each item felt like a confession, one Carrie hadn't been ready to hear until now. At noon, the salvage yard truck arrived. The same man who'd called weeks ago stepped out, clipboard in hand. "You're the Ames girl," he said, scanning the property. "Didn't think you'd actually clear this out." Carrie crossed her arms. "I'm full of surprises." He chuckled, impressed. "We'll pay 12 even for the metal, 12.5 if you toss the scrap bins." "Done," she said. They loaded truck after truck until the lot echoed empty. By dusk, the garage stood hollow for the first time in decades, the concrete floor scarred but clean. Carrie and Deb leaned against the open doorway, the fading light pooling like smoke across the floor. "You ever think he'd leave this behind?" Deb asked. Carrie shook her head. "No, but I think he knew I'd do something with it." Jared's call came just as the salvage crew pulled away. "Funds received," he said. "Marissa's wiring the first deposit tonight, half up front, half at closing." Carrie sank onto the front step, the phone pressed to her ear. "Half?" 82.5. "Check your account in the morning." When the line went dead, she just sat there, the cold seeping through her jeans, the reality of it washing over her. For years, she'd been scraping by on patience and paychecks that barely covered the rent. Now, for the first time since her father's funeral, the scales had tipped. Deb nudged her shoulder. "So, rich lady, first thing you buy?" Carrie smiled. "A better lock." They both laughed, the sound sharp and real against the wind. As they stood to leave, the streetlights flickered on, casting pale halos over the lot. Carrie glanced once more at the garage. Her garage, before locking the door for the last time. The night felt lighter somehow, as if the ghosts had finally cleared out with the junk. Then her phone buzzed again. A single notification. "Deposit received, 82,500 $500." She exhaled slowly, a tremor of disbelief running through her. The courthouse smelled faintly of paper and floor wax, the kind of sterile, civic smell that made even truth feel procedural. Carrie stood just inside the probate courtroom doors, clutching her copy of the sale contract. Her palms were damp, despite the chill. Jared stood beside her, calm as ever in his gray suit, flipping through a stack of exhibits in his briefcase. The faint click of the latches was the only sound between them. "You don't have to say a word," he said quietly. "Just stay composed. Let them hang themselves on their own argument." Carrie nodded, though her pulse was a steady drumbeat under her ribs. Across the aisle, Shane sat with his attorney, a slick man in a navy suit who radiated smugness. Misty sat beside him, wearing too much perfume and the same cheap defiance she always had. When their eyes met, she smirked like someone who thought the ending had already been written. The bailiff called the case. Ames v. Ames. Estate contest. Carrie's stomach tightened at the sound of it. The judge, an older woman with steel gray hair and the posture of someone who'd run out of patience decades ago, adjusted her glasses. "Counselor for the petitioner, proceed." Shane's lawyer rose smoothly. "Your Honor, we contend that the decedent, Thomas Ames, intended his garage business and associated properties to be divided among his two children, Shane and Carolyn. The current will fails to reflect that intent due to clerical oversight." He glanced at Carrie, a polished shark's smile flickering. "We have reason to believe Ms. Ames manipulated documents to consolidate ownership before the estate finalized." Carrie stiffened, but Jared didn't move. He simply waited for the silence to stretch, then stood. "With respect, Your Honor," he began, voice even and precise, This accusation has no foundation, in fact. We have the original will, filed, notarized, and certified by this very court. We also have time-stamped photographs of the property taken by my client immediately after probate began, confirming the estate's condition, and 2 affidavits, one from the probate office clerk, Ms. Ellie Tran, and another from the estate records notary, affirming chain of custody. He placed each document in front of the clerk, methodically, like a magician revealing a trick with no sleight of hand, only proof. The judge skimmed the first page, her brows lifting slightly. All properly notarized. Continue. Jared adjusted his glasses. The petitioner's argument of intent is speculation. Mr. Ames's intent is documented in the will's language, the garage property and all contained assets to Carolyn Ames. There is no mention of shared ownership, division, or trust. Furthermore, the estate has already executed a verified sale agreement under lawful title. He held up the sale contract. The signature line gleamed under the fluorescent lights. Carolyn Ames, seller. Shane's lawyer rose again, flustered. Intent overrides clerical. The judge cut him off. Intent is irrelevant when documentation is this clear. She removed her glasses, fixing him with a look that could strip paint. This case is a waste of the court's time. Petition denied. Shane's face went crimson. Misty's jaw dropped. The gavel struck once. Dismissed. With prejudice. It was over before Carrie had time to fully register it. Jared turned to her, lips curving faintly. Congratulations, Ms. Ames. You just won. Carrie exhaled shakily. That's it? That's it, he said. They can't refile. Across the aisle, Misty stood abruptly, her chair screeching. You think this makes you better than us? She hissed. You stole it. Carrie met her eyes. No, Misty, I earned it. The bailiff stepped between them as Misty stormed out, Shane trailing behind her, shoulders rigid with fury. Carrie stayed seated until the room emptied. The echo of the gavel still rang in her head. Final. Absolute. She looked down at the sale contract in her lap, her name typed in clean black ink. For once, it didn't feel like borrowed power. It felt real. Jared gathered his papers. I'll record the judgment and forward certified copies to your buyer's attorney. We should see full closure within a week. Carrie stood, her knees weak but steady. Thank you, Jared. He nodded. You did the hard part. Outside, the air was brittle and bright. Snow from the morning had melted into slush that reflected the courthouse steps like a mirror. Deb was waiting at the curb in her car, waving. Well? She called. Carrie lifted the contract over her head like a victory banner. We won. Deb whooped loud enough to turn heads. Hell yes! They climbed into the car, laughter bubbling between them, the sound light, free. Carrie leaned her head against the cold window, letting herself finally exhale. Then her phone buzzed. A new message. Ellie. The buyer just wired the full amount. For a second, Carrie couldn't breathe. She blinked, reading it again. Full amount. Deb glanced over. What's wrong? Carrie turned the screen toward her. It's done. The car filled with stunned silence. Then Deb laughed, almost disbelieving. You're a 6-figure woman now, Ames. Carrie's pulse thundered in her ears. For months, she'd been clawing her way through the ashes of her father's mess, fighting ghosts and blood and paper. And now she'd turned it all into something solid. But as the courthouse receded in the rearview mirror, Carrie caught sight of a blue pickup parked across the street. The same one she'd seen before. Its engine idled, exhaust curling in the cold air, the driver's face hidden behind the glare of the windshield. The next morning broke clear and sharp, the kind of Buffalo winter day where the air felt brittle enough to shatter. Carrie sat at her kitchen table, laptop open, a mug of coffee gone cold beside it. The email from Jared had come just after sunrise. Subject line simple and final. Transfer confirmed. Her fingers hovered over the trackpad before she clicked. Inside were two attachments: a scanned copy of the deed transfer and the bank confirmation receipt. Both stamped, signed, and real. Jared's message was short. All funds cleared. Deed recorded. You're officially out. Congratulations, Carolyn. For a long minute, she just stared. Then she opened her banking app. Available balance, $164,250.27. The number didn't feel real. It pulsed on the screen like a mirage, something that could dissolve if she blinked too hard. Carrie exhaled slowly, the sound shaking out of her chest. "It's over," she whispered. And for the first time in months, she believed it. By noon, Deb had dragged her to a bistro downtown, the kind with white tablecloths and prices written like secrets. "You're paying," Deb said, grinning as she handed back the menu. "Rich girls buy lunch." Carrie rolled her eyes but didn't argue. She ordered 2 glasses of champagne just to see what celebration tasted like. "To what?" Deb asked, raising her glass. Carrie smiled. "To outlasting them." They clinked glasses, the sound bright and clean. After lunch, Deb surprised her with an envelope, 2 spa vouchers, tucked neatly between napkins. "Call it a reset day," she said. "You've earned one that doesn't involve printers or probate filings." Carrie laughed, a sound that came easier now. "Only if you come too." "Damn right I am." By the time they left, the gray had softened into pale sunlight. It glowed off the melting snow, casting the city in quiet silver. For the first time in forever, Buffalo didn't look tired. It looked possible. That night, back at her apartment, Carrie carried the folder of paperwork to her safe. She'd thought about shredding everything, letting the past die cleanly, but something stopped her. Proof mattered. Maybe not for court anymore, but for herself. She shut the safe and turned the dial. The heavy click echoed through the room, solid and certain. A low rumble outside drew her to the window. The blue pickup again, parked across the street, idling under the sodium light. Her stomach tightened. Shane. She didn't need to see his face to know. The shape of his shoulders, the way the exhaust clouded in bursts. She knew that rhythm. He didn't get out. Just sat there, watching. Carrie let the blinds fall. Then she walked to the closet, grabbed the metal door bar she'd bought weeks ago, and wedged it tight under the handle. She checked the new camera's live feed on her phone. Front door, hallway, parking lot. The glowing dots blinked steady. The fear didn't disappear, but it found boundaries now. Places it couldn't live anymore. She set her phone on the counter, poured herself a small whiskey, and sat at the window again. The pickup was gone. The silence that followed felt earned. The next day, a letter arrived in her mailbox, handwritten, neat cursive on cream paper. The return address read Erie County Clerk's Office. Inside was a note on simple stationery. "Carrie, I don't usually send personal mail, but watching you push this through reminded me why I still like this job. Most people fold. You didn't. Thanks for showing how it's done. Ellie Tran." Tucked behind the note was a photograph. The assessor's map with both parcels marked transferred. Across the bottom, Ellie had written in blue ink, "Clean slate." Carrie smiled, tracing the line between 418 and 418B. For once, there was no dotted line, no division. Just one whole piece of land that had been hers all along. She poured herself another cup of coffee, the steam rising in soft spirals. The phone buzzed on the counter. Unknown number. Her pulse spiked. She hesitated, thumb hovering before she answered. Silence. Then a familiar voice, calm and measured. "Enjoy your peace while it lasts." The line went dead. Carrie stood frozen, phone still to her ear. Through the blinds, she caught a flicker of movement, A figure crossing the street, slipping something into the slot of her mailbox before disappearing into the alley. She rushed down the stairs, heart hammering, and pulled the mailbox open. Inside was a single folded page torn from a newspaper. A real estate headline circled in red ink. Local developer files claim on undisclosed parcel near Jefferson Street. The bungalow sat at the edge of Orchard Park, where the city's gray finally gave way to green. It wasn't fancy. 2 bedrooms, white shutters, a porch that creaked when you stepped on it. But sunlight poured through every window, warm and unapologetic. Carrie stood in the doorway on her first morning there, coffee in hand, looking out at a yard that was more moss than grass. It didn't matter. It was hers. She'd paid cash. Half down, no financing. Jared had insisted she let him handle the paperwork, but she'd signed the final line herself, the ink drying under her own steady hand. The receipt still sat on the counter, a symbol of something she hadn't felt in years: permanence. When she'd handed the envelope to the real estate agent, he'd blinked. "All cash? You sure?" Carrie had smiled. "I'm done waiting on other people to approve my life." He'd grinned. "Then welcome home." By Saturday, Deb was knee-deep in the backyard, wielding a trowel like a weapon. "You aren't kidding," she said, scraping at the stubborn clay. "This soil's tougher than my ex." Carrie laughed, kneeling beside her. "That's why we're planting wildflowers. They grow through anything." Deb paused, glancing at her. "Kind of like you." Carrie didn't answer, but she smiled, tucking a handful of seeds into the earth. The sun caught the tiny gold flecks in the soil, and for a moment she felt weightless, like she'd finally stepped out from under the long shadow of Jefferson Street. They took a break on the porch, sipping lemonade from mismatched glasses. Deb's boots were caked in mud, her hair windblown, but she looked happy. "So, how's it feel?" "Strange," Carrie admitted. "Good strange. Quiet." "Quiet's underrated." A car rumbled past the house, a rusted Chevy this time, not the blue pickup. Still, Carrie's shoulders stiffened until it disappeared down the street. She caught Deb watching her. "He won't find you here," Deb said softly. Carrie nodded, though she wasn't sure she believed it. Later that week, a knock came at the front door. Carrie wiped her hands on a rag, half expecting another delivery from the hardware store. Instead, a man stood on the porch, mid-40s, oil-stained coveralls, cap tucked under one arm. "Ms. Ames?" he asked. "That's me." He gestured toward the driveway, where an old flatbed truck idled. On it sat the '68 Mustang Shell, the same one that had been buried under her father's junk. "Name's Vic Morales," he said. "I run Morales Auto down on Seneca. Heard you might be willing to part with this beauty." Carrie raised an eyebrow. "Beauty is a generous word." Vic chuckled. "Yeah, but my kid sees potential. He's 17, saving for his first rebuild. Thought this might be a good start." Carrie walked to the edge of the porch, studying the car. The Shell looked worse under daylight. Pitted metal, half a roof missing, but she could still see the muscle of it beneath the ruin. "Your kid's got good instincts," she said finally. "Tell him if he sticks with it, the first scar on his knuckles will feel like a medal." Vic smiled, the kind of weary gratitude only working people carried. "So, how much you want for it?" Carrie shook her head. "Nothing. Just promise me he'll finish what my dad never did." Vic blinked, stunned. "You're serious?" "Dead serious. Give him a good first project." He nodded slowly, eyes glinting. "I'll make sure he does." As the truck pulled away, the empty space in her driveway didn't feel like a loss. It felt like closing a chapter. That night, Jared called. His voice carried the same calm satisfaction she'd learned to recognize after every hard-won victory. "The title transfer's official," he said. "The last parcel under your father's name is now fully discharged. You own nothing of his anymore. Carrie smiled faintly. That's the best sentence I've heard all week. I thought you might say that. When she hung up, she walked out onto the porch again. The air was soft, touched with the smell of cut grass and lilac from the neighbor's yard. The garden bed stretched in front of her, freshly turned earth promising something new. A car passed on the road below. Ordinary, unremarkable. She didn't flinch this time. She sat on the porch swing, letting it creak in rhythm with the night sounds. Her phone buzzed on the armrest, an email notification from Jared with the subject line, "Final title confirmed." Carrie opened it, eyes tracing her name across the top of the digital deed. Then she noticed something small, easily missed in the fine print. Property line extension. Pending verification of adjacent parcel. Her brow furrowed. She zoomed in. The parcel number listed wasn't 418 or 418B. It was one she didn't recognize, 419 Jefferson Street. Rain had been falling since dawn, a slow, relentless curtain that turned the bungalow's front yard into mud and mist. Carrie stood at the window, coffee cooling in her hand, watching droplets snake down the glass. The world outside was quiet, too quiet, until headlights swept across the gravel drive. A car pulled up, a dented silver sedan she didn't recognize at first. Then the door opened. Misty stepped out. Her hair was flat from the rain, her makeup smeared, the bright confidence she'd always worn now stripped down to raw panic. She hesitated on the walkway, clutching a handbag that looked empty. Carrie set the mug down and opened the door before the knock came. Misty. For a second, Misty just stood there, trembling in the cold. Then her voice cracked. "We've got nothing left." Carrie leaned against the doorframe. "That sounds like a you problem." Misty's lower lip trembled. "Shane. He's gone. Took the truck, took the last of the cash, and just left. Our lawyer dropped us when the case tanked. We're behind on rent. The bank froze the business account, and my car's 2 months from repossession. I didn't know where else to go." The words spilled out in a rush, desperate and wet, like she could flood the doorway with pity. Carrie's expression didn't change. "Didn't you call me a thief?" Misty blinked, caught off guard. You did," Carrie said softly. "In court, in front of a judge. Said I forged my own father's will. Said I didn't deserve what he left me." She folded her arms. "And now you're on my porch." Misty's chin wobbled. "I didn't mean—" "Yeah, you did." For a long moment, the only sound was the rain. Misty shifted on the step, mascara running in streaks down her cheeks. "Look," she said finally, voice breaking. "I'm not proud of how we acted, but we're drowning. If there's anything, you can spare." Carrie tilted her head. "You mean, after you tried to take everything?" Misty pressed her palms together, tears pooling at her jawline. "You could split it, right? Whatever you still have. We can start over. Shane doesn't have to know." The laugh that escaped Carrie wasn't cruel. It was exhausted. She stepped back just far enough to rest her hand on the edge of the door. "Misty," she said quietly, "I sold everything." Misty's eyes went wide. "You... what?" "The garage, the lots, the contents, every last bolt and brick. It's gone." For a heartbeat, they just looked at each other. Two women bound by a dead man's wreckage, one finally free of it, the other crushed beneath it. Misty swallowed hard, voice small. "So that's it?" "That's it." Carrie closed the door. The sound of it latching was soft but final. She stood there for a moment, her hand still on the knob, listening to the muffled sob on the other side, the shuffle of retreating footsteps, the car door slamming. Then the engine coughed to life, and the sedan's taillights bled red through the rain as it disappeared down the road. Inside, the house felt impossibly still. The scent of wet earth drifted through the window screen. Carrie returned to the kitchen, picked up her coffee, and sat at the table. Steam curled up in the dim light, tracing the shape of her breath. She didn't feel triumphant, just clean. For the first time in years, her name didn't come with an apology or a defense, just herself. She watched the rain ease into drizzle, the sound against the roof turning steady, rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat. Her phone buzzed once on the counter. A new voicemail. Unknown number. She ignored it, took a slow sip, and let her mind go quiet. But the buzz came again. Then again. 3 times, spaced perfectly apart. Carrie frowned, stood, and checked the screen. Same number. No message. Something about the pattern, measured, deliberate, made her stomach tighten. She looked out the front window. The driveway was empty, but on the mailbox at the end of it, glinting in the thin rainlight, something had been clipped beneath the flag. A small black flash drive in a plastic bag. By Monday morning, the rain had burned off into crisp sunlight, the kind that made even Buffalo's cracked sidewalks look new for an hour or two. Carrie sat at her dining table with a neat stack of forms in front of her and a pen balanced between her fingers. Her laptop screen glowed with the words, Estate and Beneficiary Updates, Personal Account. The cursor blinked beside a single line that still bore Shane's name. She drew a slow breath, then deleted it. One by one, she went through every document: medical, financial, emergency contact, will. Each place where his name appeared, she replaced it with 2 new ones: Deborah Monroe and Eleanor Tran. Power of attorney, health proxy, executor. The women who'd stood beside her when her own blood had turned against her. She didn't feel angry anymore, just certain. By the time she finished, her coffee was cold, her hand cramped, and her shoulders ached. But when she hit submit, something inside her finally settled. The ghosts were off her paperwork, off her back, out of her life. Later that morning, she stopped by Deb's warehouse. The place buzzed with forklifts and the smell of warm metal, but Deb caught sight of her right away. "Don't tell me you're here to work," Deb said, pulling off her gloves. "You're retired now, remember?" Carrie smiled. "Actually, I'm here to donate." Deb's brow furrowed. "Donate?" Carrie pulled an envelope from her coat pocket and handed it over. Inside, a check. $5,000 made out to North County Women's Shelter. "I know you've been volunteering there for years," Carrie said. "Figured they could use a boost." Deb stared at the check, blinking fast. "Jesus, Carrie. You didn't have to." "I wanted to." For a second, Deb looked like she might cry, but instead she punched her friend lightly on the shoulder. "You're gonna make me soft." "Too late," Carrie teased. By afternoon, she was downtown again, walking through the thawing city toward Marissa Dunn's new auto shop, the one that had once been her father's garage. The place was transformed. The cracked pavement had been re-poured smooth, the rusted siding replaced with steel panels that gleamed in the sun. A new sign stretched above the bay doors: Dunn Restoration and Classics. Carrie smiled as she stepped inside. The smell of oil and paint filled the air, but now it carried energy instead of decay. Marissa looked up from under the hood of a Camaro. "Well, if it isn't the lady who gave me my dream?" Carrie held up a single key, the last one from her father's set, the padlock to the old garage office. "Thought you should have this." The last piece. Marissa wiped her hands and took it gently. "You sure?" "Yeah," Carrie said. "Some things only weigh you down if you keep carrying them." Marissa grinned. "You know, you're welcome to come by any time. Not a lot of people can say they literally built the ground we're standing on." Carrie laughed. "That's exactly why I'm not coming back." When she stepped outside again, the light hit the new asphalt just right. It looked like a clean slate. The lot next door, once a cluttered eyesore, was now a staging area for construction crews. She walked past it, the smell of sawdust and wet concrete filling the air. And then a voice called out from behind her. "Miss Ames?" She turned. A man in a crisp blazer was stepping down from the curb, hard hat tucked under one arm. His face was vaguely familiar. "Robert Alden," he said, offering a hand. "We met months ago, briefly. I represent the development group working on the Jefferson expansion." Carrie shook his hand, wary. "I remember." He smiled, not the slick, rehearsed, smile she'd heard in his voicemail, but something closer to genuine. "I wanted to tell you personally, the boundary dispute on the adjacent parcel's been resolved. Turns out your sale freed up our build line. My partners wanted to extend an offer before we move forward." Carrie raised an eyebrow. "An offer?" He nodded. "First rights on one of the new storefronts when the project's complete. You'd be the first local owner approached. No corporate bids, no middlemen." She blinked, momentarily stunned. "Why me?" "Because you kept that corner alive," he said simply. "You turned something everyone else dismissed into a reason for us to look twice. That deserves a stake in what's coming next." Carrie looked past him to where the bulldozers rumbled, the skyline beyond lined with cranes. For years, this stretch of Jefferson had been nothing but decay. Now, the future was breaking ground right where her father's ghosts had lived. "I'll think about it," she said, voice steady. "Do," Alden replied, handing her his card. "You've got a good eye for value. We could use that." He walked off toward the site, calling orders to the foreman, leaving her standing there with the card between her fingers. First rights. The words carried weight. Not greed, not fear. Possibility. Carrie tucked the card into her pocket and started walking. Past the garage, past the lot, past everything that used to define her. For the first time, the air didn't smell like oil or rain. It smelled like spring. But as she reached the corner, she caught sight of something that stopped her cold. Spray painted across the construction fence in bright red letters. 419 Jefferson, coming soon. Her pulse stuttered. She knew that number. The flash drive on her counter. The label. She turned slowly toward the lot that bordered the new project, a stretch of dirt still untouched, its fencing locked tight. The flash drive sat on the corner of Carrie's desk, still sealed in its plastic sleeve. She hadn't plugged it in yet. Not because she was afraid of what she'd find, but because she already knew it would change everything. Instead, she poured her energy into something tangible, something no one could steal. Her next move. The bungalow's spare bedroom had become an office overnight. Corkboard pinned with zoning maps, notes, and sketches of ideas scrawled on sticky notes. In the center of it all sat a legal pad with one title underlined twice: Ames Auto Finds. Draft business plan. Ellie had been the first to encourage her. "You know more about the parts trade than half the guys in this city," Ellie said over the phone. "Why not flip the narrative and the inventory?" Carrie had laughed at that, but she hadn't disagreed. Now Ellie sat across from her in the cluttered office, sipping coffee from a mug that read, "Trust me, I filed it properly." The morning light through the blinds caught the dust motes as they floated. Between them. "So," Ellie said, leaning forward, "what's the angle?" "Small salvage resales," Carrie replied, flipping open the notebook. "Auto parts with history. Stuff people overlook because it's not shiny enough. I'll buy from estate auctions, old garages, scrapyards. Clean them up, verify serials, and list them online. Authenticity sells." Ellie grinned. "A nostalgia business. Smart." "More like reclamation," Carrie said. "I spent months selling off my father's junk. Turns out people will pay good money for it." Ellie tapped her pen against the desk. "You realize this could become a full storefront if you wanted." Carrie hesitated, glancing toward the card pinned to her corkboard. Robert Alden, Jefferson Development Group. "Maybe someday," she said carefully. "Right now, I like having my own steering wheel." By midweek, Deb had joined the operation. Her version of helping meant turning Carrie's living room into a temporary shipping hub. Cardboard boxes were stacked to the ceiling, each labeled with a different auction number. Inventory check, Deb said, holding up a dented carburetor. Is this a vintage collectible or a future tetanus hazard? Both, Carrie said. Deb grinned. Perfect. That's our tagline. The two women worked in easy rhythm, surrounded by the sounds of bubble wrap, packing tape, and the low hum of classic rock from the radio. Somewhere between sorting parts and printing shipping labels, they found themselves laughing like teenagers again. You realize you're basically running an empire out of a two-bedroom house, right? Deb said. Empire's a strong word, Carrie replied, sealing a box. Let's call it revenge with receipts. Deb raised her coffee in a toast. To revenge. Carrie clinked hers against it. And receipts. By Friday, her online listings had begun to move. Vintage valve covers, rebuilt alternators, antique tool sets. Each sale notification that pinged her inbox felt like a small victory. At one point, she scrolled through her store page and froze. A buyer from Illinois had purchased one of the restored nameplates from her father's garage. His message read, "Got my first job at Ames Garage in 1989. Thanks for keeping it alive." Carrie read it twice before replying, glad to see it's still running in some way. Late that afternoon, as the last package was taped and ready for pickup, her phone rang. Jared's name flashed on the screen. "Tell me you're not working," he said as soon as she answered. "Depends on your definition," Carrie replied. He chuckled. "I just got off the phone with Alden. Word around the zoning office is you're on the short list for one of those new storefronts. He says the board's calling it a community revitalization opportunity. I call it poetic justice." Carrie leaned back in her chair, smiling faintly. He can call it whatever he wants. "You've officially outsmarted them, you know," Jared said. "The whole family saga, the contest, the sale. Most people would have folded 10 times over." Carrie let the silence stretch a moment before answering. "I didn't have to try that hard." He laughed softly. "That's what makes it sting." They hung up, and she stood, stretching. The setting sun poured through the blinds, throwing long lines of gold across the floor. She looked around, at the boxes, the shipping labels, the quiet hum of a business built from ashes, and felt something close to peace. She crossed to the desk and picked up the flash drive still sitting there, unopened. The black plastic gleamed faintly in the light. For a long time, she just stared at it, thumb tracing the white label. 419 Jefferson. Proof. Then she walked to her computer, slid the drive into the port, and waited. A single folder appeared on the screen. Inside it, one video file, time-stamped 2 weeks before her father's death. The preview image froze her breath. It showed Thomas Ames, sitting in his cluttered office, speaking to someone off-camera. The corner of the frame revealed another figure, a younger man, broad-shouldered, familiar, Shane. The air smelled of sawdust and rain-washed pavement, the scent of things rebuilt. Carrie stood beneath a brand-new awning, her name in bold black script across the sign overhead. Ames Auto Finds. The storefront gleamed, glass spotless, the trim painted the same deep red as the old Mustang that had once sat like a ghost in her father's garage. She ran a hand across the edge of the doorframe, the fresh paint still smooth beneath her fingers. Deb stood a few feet away, holding her phone high. "All right, boss lady. Smile like you didn't just pull off the comeback of the decade." Carrie turned toward the lens, the faintest grin tugging at her mouth. "Just take the damn picture before I change my mind." The shutter clicked. Behind her, the bell above the door jingled softly in the breeze. The interior still smelled faintly of new drywall and motor oil. Rows of vintage parts lined the shelves, chrome emblems, restored carburetors, repainted hubcaps, all tagged and polished, the past stripped of rust and turned to something worth keeping. Deb lowered her phone, eyes glistening. You did it. Carrie looked around, the afternoon sunlight spilling through the wide windows, painting warm lines across the floor. We did it. By noon, the crowd began to gather. Neighbors, a few curious gearheads, and a couple of local reporters snapping photos of the woman who turned a legacy of scrap into a business. Ellie arrived first, wearing jeans and a leather jacket instead of her usual courthouse cardigans. She carried a bouquet of yellow tulips tucked under one arm. For the grand opening, she said, handing them over with a grin. I thought something bright felt right. Carrie took them gently. Perfect, she said, like sunshine you can hold. Jared showed up a few minutes later, straight from the office in a pressed suit, his tie slightly crooked from the wind. You've done it again, he said, looking around the shop. You realize this corner used to be the ugliest stretch in Buffalo? Used to be, Carrie said. He laughed. Developers are calling it the Jefferson turnaround. You started something whether you meant to or not. Ellie nudged him with her elbow. She always means to. Deb popped the cork on a bottle of cheap champagne, the sound echoing off the metal shelves. Bubbles spilled over her fingers as she poured a little into mismatched mugs. Here's to second chances and better zoning laws. Carrie raised hers. I'll drink to both. They clinked mugs, laughter filling the shop. As the day went on, customers trickled in. Locals curious about the new store, collectors who'd followed her listings online. A father and son stopped at the counter to admire a restored steering wheel. Look at that craftsmanship, the father said. They don't make them like this anymore. Carrie smiled. No, they don't. But we find what's left and make it matter. The boy grinned up at her, and for a flicker of a moment she saw herself, 10 years old, watching her father fix an engine, the air heavy with exhaust and unspoken expectations. That memory used to ache. Now it just reminded her how far she'd come. By late afternoon, the sun dipped behind the half-finished development across the street. Construction crews had packed up for the day, their equipment casting long shadows across the lot. Carrie stepped outside with Deb and Ellie, the tulips still sitting in the shop window. The city's hum felt softer here, steadier. You ever think you'd end up back on this block? Ellie asked. Carrie shook her head. I thought I'd spend the rest of my life trying to forget it. Deb leaned against the doorway. Funny how life forces you to come back just so you can leave the right way. Carrie smiled at that. The garage that had broken her was gone, its ghosts paved over, its weight finally gone from her shoulders. In its place stood something she'd built herself. She glanced across the street at the new development's billboard, still blank from the last storm. Fresh lettering was being stenciled across it now. Local partners welcome. Shane's name wasn't on it. He hadn't been seen in weeks. For the first time in a long time, she didn't care where he'd gone. Some disappearances are just doors closing for good. Carrie looked up at her sign again, Ames Auto Finds, the letters shining against the soft blue sky. The wind lifted a strand of her hair, the tulips swayed in the window, and inside, the shop lights glowed like small, stubborn stars. Deb raised her phone again. One more for the archives. Carrie turned toward her, the smile this time unguarded, easy. They left me with scraps, she said softly, the words more to herself than anyone else. Then she looked at her friends, at the sunlight, at the world she'd claimed piece by piece. And I built something no one could take. The doorbell chimed as another customer stepped inside. Carrie followed, leaving the past behind her for good.